Mike Brown, the new head coach for the New York Knicks, has called out the team, and you are not going to believe what he had to say. We have to break it all down. What's up, guys? I'm Matt Long. Welcome to Knicks Basketball 365. You're a New York Knicks fan. Hit that subscribe button. But getting into the news for today, coming from Sports Illustrated, Brown came to New York with big promises. He wanted to speed up the pace, share the ball more, and take more three-pointers. The numbers show some progress. The Knicks improved from 26th to 20th in pace and jumped from 28th to 1st in three-point attempt rate. But the execution remains problematic. Brown admitted himself the second half against Milwaukee was terrible. The ball came to a standstill, he said, criticizing his players for standing and watching instead of moving. The offensive flow that looked brilliant in the first half completely disappeared when it mattered most. So, first of all, the end of that Milwaukee Bucks game was absolutely terrible. That was a game that the New York Knicks should have won. They had a pretty solid lead in the second quarter, but were not able to capitalize it. And by the end of the game, standing and watching is exactly how to describe it. No one was moving, and at the very end, the Milwaukee Bucks went on a big run in the end of the fourth quarter to take the game away from the Knicks. The Knicks were up 102 to 101 or something like that, very close. And then in a blink, they still had 102 points, and Milwaukee had added over 10 points to their total. But Mike Brown now calling out the New York Knicks for standing around and watching instead of running his new scheme. I know that there was a lot of ball watching when it came to Tom Thibodeau's offense from last year. A lot of his schemes had Jalen Brunson standing at the top of the key and just dribbling the basketball to run the shot clock down, run the game clock down to make sure that both sides were not going to have a whole lot of possessions. That kind of covered up the shortcomings of what Tom Thibodeau's offensive scheme had to offer. But Mike Brown's offense is supposed to be different, and it is different so far. The pace, just like he said it would, it has sped up. The New York Knicks are running and gunning, but the problem is they're not moving the basketball in the way they're supposed to be moving it. Mike Brown has a ton of his schemes comes from, moving without the ball, off-ball picks, and other schemes to get players open shots, and the New York Knicks are just not doing them. Now, I think Mike Brown, maybe this isn't a super aggressive call out, but it's definitely something that you would have rather heard behind closed doors from your head coach. At least it wasn't a personal call out. He didn't say Josh Hart was standing still. I know Josh Hart would never stand still, but it's not like he said Josh Hart was standing still or Karl-Anthony Towns has to do this, Jalen Brunson has to do that. It was kind of a whole team call out, but still or maybe he did it to absolutely galvanize the team by doing it publicly, but there's no excuses for this offense being as poor as it's been so far. But we have to remember it's a new scheme that our depth chart is currently not ready to be running, and there have been a ton of injuries, which makes it even harder for guys to learn the scheme because they're not getting the full playing time that they're supposed to have, and they are not, available for games, and the coaches don't understand who plays well with each other when so many players are missing such a high amount of games so far, even though we are only 6 games into the season. So, but what we're looking at depth chart wise, Karl-Anthony Towns is the guy that is going to be a huge difference for the scheme because he's a big man who shoots the ball better than pretty much any other big man in the league right now. So you would think the New York Knicks would be running up the scoreboard with three-pointers. Their three-point attempt rate is number 1 in the league, but they're more towards the middle of the pack, hovering around 13th in three-point percentage. So that's one of the, I don't want to say easiest fixes that the New York Knicks can make, but it's one of the most obvious changes that have to be made. You just got to make shots. When you're shooting a ton of three-pointers, you got to hit them. I know that's low-level analysis, but that's really one of the number one things that has to happen for this team. Josh Hart, one of our number 1 players off the bench, has been dealing with a finger injury that is really messing up his shooting. He's only shooting around 25% from the field. Josh Hart really struggling. Also, some other players off the bench are not shooting as well as you would expect them. Jordan Clarkson, the big-time pickup in free agency, someone who the Knicks are expecting to be the offense when the bench comes in the game because there are going to be less minutes for the starters this year with under Mike Brown. So Jordan Clarkson is going to be playing more minutes than backup guards would have gotten under Tom Thibodeau. And so far, the scoring has not caught up to the amount of minutes he's getting off the bench. And overall, the bench unit as a whole for the New York Knicks has not been good enough. now that Miles McBride is back from his, personal reason why he missed a game, the offense has gotten better, but it's still not where it needs to be. This team needs to understand Mike Brown's scheme at a higher level, and there's only one way that that's going to happen. It's by playing more games, and a lot of this is the New York Knicks not understanding how to properly run Mike Brown's scheme because it's still so early in the season. The New York Knicks knocking off the Washington Wizards last night was great to see, and one of the number one things that was good to see was Karl-Anthony Towns getting back on track. I've seen, a lot of Knicks fans are getting fed up with Karl-Anthony Towns because while he's been putting up some decent-ish numbers over the past couple games before the Wizards game, he wasn't shooting effectively at all. The shooting field goal percentage made rate was really low for Karl-Anthony Towns, by his standards low. There were some games where he just wasn't, shooting threes, which isn't expected for a team that has a high pace and is shooting a lot of threes and has a great big man who's really good at shooting threes. But we have to remember Karl-Anthony Towns is also working through an injury himself, and he's learning what his role is in this system, because when you are the 5 in Mike Brown's system versus the 4, there's a huge difference between those two roles, which means Karl-Anthony Towns so far has had to learn 2 different roles, because he started the year at the 5 for the Knicks, or not game 1, but after game 1, he was at the 5 for the Knicks. And then now that Mitchell Robinson's back, Cat is moved back to the 4. So has to learn 2 jobs on the fly under Mike Brown's offense, as well as when Mitchell Robinson is as, let's just say, inconsistent when it comes to his availability. Karl-Anthony Towns is going to have to play more at the 5, and he's going to have to be ready for a whole lot. So he has more on his plate than pretty much anyone else does on the New York Knicks, because his role changes on what is unfortunately a nightly basis. Now, the way that you can fix that problem is if Ariel Hukporti's development continues and he can turn into sort of a Walmart version of Mitchell Robinson, whereas if either one of those guys are healthy, Karl-Anthony Towns is going to be playing the 4 that night. That would be significantly better, because Cat can just lock down what it means to be a power forward in Mike Brown's offense, while Hukporti or Mitchell Robinson handle the rim protection and the rebounding from the 5 position. But one more guy that we got to show some love to, OG Anunoby, is one of the perfect guys for Mike Brown's scheme, because I've talked about how Mike Brown loves calling up the off-ball picks, which a lot of the times it ends in a player leaking down to the corner. Maybe it's the pick guy who leaks out, or an off-ball pick to get an open corner 3, and OG Anunoby is one of the best corner 3-point shot makers in the entire NBA, and OG just got to keep playing his game. Love the defense that he brings to the table, of course, but he's got to make sure he continues to hit those corner 3s at a high level, which he has done in the past, and I would expect him to continue doing going forwards. But hopefully the New York Knicks are not going to be having to be called out by Mike Brown again. All we got to do, learn the system, because it worked in Sacramento. That team scored a ton of points. This team still has a ton of defensive grit, and they know how to play defense from playing under Tom Thibodeau. So far this year, they forced a ton of turnovers, and they just got to learn the offense. So an event like the Milwaukee Buck game, where just the offense completely stops, even with Jalen Brunson on the floor, can't happen again. But just got to remember, still early in the season, this team, we have to give them at least 15 games to understand the new offensive system under new head coach Mike Brown. So this team, they're going to figure it out. They still should be just fine. Under Tom Thibodeau, through the first 15 or so games, they were under 500 for 4 of those 5 years. And that 5th year where they were over 500 is when they finished poorly in the 2nd year of Tom Thibodeau's tenure. But this team is going to get better. Knick fans, we do not have to worry. But if you stuck around this long, appreciate you for watching the video. Hit the like button if you haven't already. Hit the subscribe button if you're new to the channel, and go Knicks.